Hello and welcome to All Hands on Tech, where today's leaders talk tomorrow's technology. I'm Daniel Blazer. Today's episode is all about helping your team stay focused while navigating uncertainty. The audio comes from a panel discussion that we hosted earlier this month and features our own Jeremy Morgan along with 3 world-class engineering leaders. I'll leave it to Jeremy to introduce the participants and get the conversation started.
Edvish Robinson is an expert technologist, a women in tech advocate, and a VP of mobile engineering services at Comcast NBC Universal. Patrick Kwa is the founder of Tech Lead Academy, keynote speaker, and former CTO and chief scientist at N26. David Adsit is the CTO of Immersion with over 2 decades of experience in engineering and leadership. We'll go ahead and jump right in here and say, when you have disruptive changes within your organization or externally, how do you personally stay focused?
For me, at a very high level, as my focus starts early in the morning, I call it priming my mind. So I want to ensure that I set my mind in a way that before I leave the house, before I even get to work, I'm in a positive mindset. And I use meditation all the way. I used to take the train to Center City, Philadelphia. So today I just take a little walk and I do my meditation, and that allowed me to prime my mind in a positive manner. And by doing so, it allowed me to reduce reactiveness so that before you get into the business and the craziness of the day, your mind is kind of like safe, and it allows you to not be reactive when certain things happen. So that's what I usually do to kind of keep myself in a positive mindset.
Awesome. So it's kind of like warming up your car, making sure that everything's operational and good in the morning. Patrick or David, do you have any?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. I totally agree with Edvish as well. I think having that time is really key to not being reactive. I think to be effective as a leader, you need to have your sort of calm space. And similarly, for me, it's mornings as well. I tend to wake up early, have a tea, and then try to do some sport. So it's changed a little bit now that things are a little bit more shut. So it's been a little bit more of things like yoga at home. And then I can have a sort of clear hour before really getting into the busyness of lots of different things. But I think that key of actually making time to really think, prioritize, and consider where you're going to have the most impact, I think is the most important thing for me, to make sure that you're taking care of what's important for your team.
Yeah, I do something similar. I get up every morning and I go down to my home gym and start the day with a cardio workout, and usually a podcast or an audiobook or even a book on the Kindle in front of the treadmill, so that I can get my mind awake with something challenging that will, maybe set the tone for the day, something that I'm trying to learn or whatever. I find that if I start with that, it gets done. And if I try to fit it in during the day or the end of the day, it just doesn't happen. So my days go better when I get that kind of a start.
So how do you manage stressful situations in order to continue leading?
Yeah, I think stressful situations are kind of interesting because your first instinct is probably to react to the event. And I think one of the things that I first learned when I was starting on my journey of leadership was really about not reacting immediately, because your brain is going to go into sort of fight or defense mode, and you're probably not going to think things clearly. So I think my strategy personally is really to make sure that you sort of take a breath. Depending on what it is, you might go for a walk to try to sort of calm down to a point where you can think about what's happening in a little bit of a sort of clearer mindset. And I think there's 2 things that I think are kind of key. One is really being able to understand and focus on the facts and separate that from, maybe all the opinions that people are sort of throwing around about what they think happened. Because I think once you actually have the facts, then you can actually come up with an idea about what you would sort of personally do and approach that situation with.
That's a really good one, Patrick. I think for me is I do a lot of reframing. I don't know if maybe a lot of you guys are using reframing. When something's very stressful happen, I usually myself and the team to not react, as you mentioned, Patrick, not react immediately, but how can you reframe the situation? So for example, somebody would say, there's something's going on, I cannot do anything about it. And I would basically go back and tell the team member, what is the one thing that you can do that you have control over? You may not be able to change the whole situation, but what is the one thing that you can do? And usually by providing the team the power back to them to a certain degree, that allows people to reduce the stressful kind of like situation you're in. Because usually when people have stress, and whether it's internal or external, is because we lose the power to be able to do something about it. Or we want to be able to resolve it, but we don't have a solution. So it creates a tremendous amount of stress. So by reframing the situation, doesn't mean that you don't believe that is a reality, but by reframing it, it allows you to refresh your mind and try to look at it in a positive manner and how to solve it. So reframing is actually one of the tools that I use with my leaders, my direct, and I also tell my direct to use that with their team members, so that when something happens, we have a tool to go back to instead of being reactive.
I really like that. You have the opportunity between the stimulus and the response to pause and think, right? And one of the things that I like to go back to in a stressful situation is that the way you behave when you are under stress is what you really believed anyway. Mm-hmm. So if I've set up processes and practices and techniques with my teams in a stressful situation, that's not the best time to reevaluate everything that you're doing, right? That's a good time to lean into the things that you've been doing successfully and then maybe make some adjustments based on the updated information, right? So that's one of the things that I like to do, and one of the things that's been pretty successful with my team so far.
And so do you all take an approach of kind of taking time to make bigger decisions? Say, you all of your answers kind of had the same theme. It was kind of like an inquiry before advocacy, before just jumping and being reactive, as Edvish said. Do you all support kind of with big decisions saying, I'm going to take the time to make this decision and deliver it to the team, rather than right here and now? Do you all support that kind of a little time gap there, just to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room to reflect?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, you have. I usually bucket the decision making in two big buckets. So there's an executive decision I had to make as a leader. This is the way that we need to go, and I made a decision. We need to move it and execute on it. Versus there's the decision that I need to make, but I want the input from the team. So whether the situation is a very stressful situation or a regular day, at a certain point, I want the team to be a part of the conversation so that they can come along. And usually when the situation is very stressful, you want them to be part of the decision making and telling them how the decisions are being made, so that they don't think that you're just making a decision to kind of push things around. But it's good to bring people along in how the decisions are made and what are the data points that you are using in order to make the decision. So that will usually reduce the resistance from the team once a decision is made.
I think that's right. I've seen that many times, where if you can bring someone into the decision-making process, they become a lot more invested in the outcome and really try to put all their effort into making that decision happen. On the other side, you sometimes have decisions that have to be made very urgently, right? If something's on fire, literally or metaphorically, we have those situations where the production database is suddenly spiking to 100%. We don't know why. What can we do? No one can use the website. Everything is down. You have a decision then of dig in and analyze it, or restart everything and get it back to a baseline and then try to analyze it from the logs, knowing you're going to miss something. You're going to lose some fidelity, right? And so you don't always have the luxury of having a group make that decision in those extremely urgent and rare circumstances. And sometimes you just have to say as a leader, we're going to do this. And then by telling people we're going to do this, it kind of gives them permission to start working towards a solution instead of getting stuck in a panic cycle. my decision-making strategy most often is to involve the team as much as possible. I think that is a great strategy, and I really like that you brought that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that both of these approaches really resonate with me as well. I think one thing that I find helpful is to sort of think about when you need to make a decision. So when's the sort of last responsible moment sometimes people talk about. There are those decisions like the incident outage where you can't really delay it. You might need to triage, take an action, make a decision quickly. But, once a sort of incident is kind of at least patched, you might be able to create some more space to actually think about how you approach it and engage the team a lot more. And I think kind of like what David said as well is that, by giving a decision, sometimes that can create less stress for people because they're confident, okay, we have some solution, maybe not the ideal solution, but we have a approach that we can try. And in that process, you might actually create some more time as well. And I think that's probably the difficult thing about stressful situations is that by its nature, these things tend to be a bit more emergencies where you don't have as much time to make. So I think one of the strategies of trying to find that time and decide which sort of decisions that you're making is kind of a key leadership skill to practice.
Without a crystal ball to see the future, how do you keep yourself motivated in times of instability?
I mean, for me, one of the key things I usually do is I start to align myself with my family and the work that I do. Is that change is part of change is part of life. And you're going to have issues, you're going to have inconsistency, you're going to have something coming your way. So again, it goes back to the mental hygiene. And that's what to me, people usually kind of like, pass it along. But I feel like it's the bedrock for any motivation or any sustainability for your mind. You need to have a mental hygiene in a way that you keep yourself in a positive manner, regardless of what's coming your way. And, from where I'm from the Ivory Coast, and usually people used to say, I'm happy today I woke up and I have shoes on my feet. And somebody else may say, that's like a very low bar. But from where we're from, you have to find a way, the silver lining within whatever situation you're in, so that you can find a positive thing into it. So that, to me, that's what I use to keep myself motivated, no matter where I am, no matter what circumstance I am. Coronavirus or whatever the situation is, we're all going through it, and you need to find a way to reframe it and then have a mental hygiene.
I want to piggyback on something that Edvish said before, which I think is that sort of reframing around what you can control. And I think that's one of those big things, is that there's so many different things that are happening around people during stressful moments that you literally can't control. It's like things that are just happening around you, but you can control how you react to it. You can control how much you engage with it. Particularly in these sort of times with social media or news, one of the things I'm personally trying to do is sort of limit the amount of time that I spend, because I know that each time I do, it's generally going to be pretty depressing. And so I think, refocusing on those things that you can control, and these are your actions, how you respond to events, and then also how you perceive those things. So I think that's the I guess, looking for the silver lining and that reframing, trying to look for the opportunities and things. And I think one other thing that really helps, particularly with teams, is really trying to also celebrate the things that people are doing. I'm a really big believer in trying to celebrate and focusing on those small wins, because it's about sort of recognition and feedback for people, but also, you have to really help motivate other people who they may not realize what they are actually doing is actually having a positive impact. So there are a couple of things that work for me.
Yeah, as the two of you have been talking, it's had me thinking about some of the philosophies of Stoicism and the modern update around mindfulness practice, right? I have some kids who they suffer a bit with anxiety, especially around school, and it's been kind of heightened in the last few months, right? So the practices of mindfulness and being present in the moment and recognizing how much of what's going on you don't have control over, but you do have control over your response, right? I can decide that I'm going to be happy because I have shoes on my feet, or I can decide that I'm going to be unhappy because of things that are wildly outside of my control. And so I like to bring some of those ideas into my approach to leadership. knowing that a lot of things are outside of our control. But that doesn't mean that we have to feel a loss of control in a situation.
Do you all feel that there's a cultural aspect to that? Because, as far as leadership goes, before you've ever been a leader, you probably think, well, the leader is just supposed to tell us what to do, or the leader is supposed to steer the ship. But what I've found in my career over the years is the leader sets the culture. Yeah. And so creating that kind of culture would keep me motivated as a leader. If I knew that the people that were coming in every day that I was leading were happy to be there and happy to do what they were doing, then I'm happy. And that made me personally happy. So do you guys feel the same way, where it's kind of a cultural thing? Like if you can get the culture right and get them focused, that helps everybody focus on everything?
Jeremy, I'm glad that you mentioned culture, because it's something that I usually compare that to cooking. It takes time, and usually people don't want to talk about the ingredient that are required to build a culture. So how do you build that culture so that when there's an issue or when there's a problem, the team is still okay, or keeping the team motivated? That's based on working with trust with the team, mentoring the team, having those one-on-one with them, and working with them very closely, especially when they're going to get tough and when they make mistakes, so that they know that it's okay for them to make mistakes. So in order to build that culture, you have to invest so much before. You have to do so much work before you can even establish that culture, so that when the time comes, you're like, I want to keep my team motivated. But it's like basically you have to put money in the bank before you can withdraw, right? So you need to put a lot of money in your team bank, so that when the going get tough and then when you want to keep them motivated, you can go and withdraw that money that you put in. So for me, to keep the team motivated is the trust that I build with them day in and day out. I work, everybody in the team, I know their birthday, and most of them, based on stuff that we've done in the past, I know who has kids, who has a family member. And in this time right now that we pivot to remote working, not everybody's having the same at-home experience. A lot of people are dealing with domestic violence. A lot of people are dealing with, taking care of family members that are sick. But by meeting the team where they are, in spite of everything going on, it allowed you to develop the trust, and it also allowed them to keep them motivated because they know that they have a leader that cares. So everything is kind of like intertwined, and I can probably pause over here.
I love your metaphor about the sort of cooking as well, because you have to do the preparation and you also have to sort of clean up and keep the kitchen tidy once you're actually doing the cooking. With culture, one of the other metaphors I use is sort of gardening. So I'm actually really a terrible gardener, but I kind of think about this metaphor in that, when you have seeds or plants, you can't force them to grow in the way that you want, but you have to keep the soil fertilized. You have to provide the nutrition and enough sunlight, enough water, but not too much of either of those things. I think the other exciting thing that you can be as a leader is really asking yourself, what sort of garden or what sort of culture are you sort of trying to cultivate? And it's one of those things where it's really coming down to the things that you encourage or discourage or you allow. And I think that third category is really interesting, because I've seen a lot of leaders who sort of fail to address perhaps behavior that's maybe not so helpful, but implicitly they're allowing that behavior as well. And that becomes part of that sort of standard culture. And so for me, I kind of think about the metaphor of the weeding, right? You have to think about those perhaps undesirable behaviors, or give a channel for that so that you can sort of put them into the right sort of place. And feedback is one of those tools to make sure people are actually hearing about what is that sort of thing. But I think the idea of gardening and sort of cultivating culture is like one of those things that I think about when it comes to sort of the team.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the focus on culture and especially around feedback. One of the things my leadership team has gone through recently is discussing the book Radical Candor and how feedback needs to be given in the moment and how it can be used to correct and direct. We have a few different things that we do to that end, and one of them is we have a peer-to-peer feedback system in our company where you can recognize someone for doing something that is aligned with one of our company values. And by doing that, it then gets published to the Slack channel for the whole company, and everybody gets to see so-and-so did this, and I think that's aligned with our company value in this way. And so you get a bit of that individual treatment, that individual recognition, but it's coming from a peer, not necessarily from a leader, which is interesting in that it also reveals to the leadership group a bit about how people are interpreting our company values, which is another opportunity to go back and feed that culture. Maybe someone is getting recognized for something that we really don't think is in alignment. And now we have two things to address in one-on-one conversations. Like, why did you think that this was the right way to behave? And also, why did you give this person recognition for behaving in this way? It's an opportunity to understand how people are interpreting the culture of the company. And so that's been really powerful for us as well.
Good point. That's an excellent point. As Patrick mentioned earlier, the behavior you allow become the culture. And it's funny sometimes when people will have different, I call it the peacock of the team. They're allowed to do whatever they want to do. And people are like, well, but this person actually delivers very good. He's like the amazing coder, and you have to let him do whatever he wants. And it's polluting the culture at the same time. And you're not motivating the team by doing so. You're actually destroying the rest of the team in order to keep this one, AKA rock star that you quote unquote. So the culture that the behavior that you allow actually become the culture. And as leaders, you need to be very conscious about it and be very careful of what we allow to happen.
I think we all have an opportunity to work with that one person at some point, right? It's almost like the test of your leadership philosophy. Like, now you've got the guy, what do you do? That's always a challenging situation, but I think you're right. You have to focus on, what are you building? What are you trying to build? Are you building a company, or are you building an individual's ego?
Yeah.
And if you are willing to focus on the needs of the overall product, company, and culture, then it becomes very obvious what you need to do in that situation. One of the pithy things people say about culture is what you do, it's who you hire, and it's who you fire.
So focus is hard with like a miles-long to-do list. And we've all seen, the huge, gigantic backlogs. How do you go about prioritizing what you and your team are focused on?
That's the $1 million question, right?
This is the one that I'm most enthusiastic about. It all has to start from the company direction, right? There's a lot of different ways people talk about that. Your company strategy, your mission, your vision, the objectives and key results that's been popularized in the last few years, right? It's all about deciding what is most important from a company strategy, and how you do that is going to depend on the company that you're in. But if you can get that strategy set, then you now have something to evaluate what you're working on against. Am I aligned with the strategy? Am I working towards the strategy? Or is what I'm doing necessary and tactical? Or do I just not know? Should I be changing what I'm working on entirely? And so I've found that this is a really powerful way of creating and maintaining alignment on my teams. And one of the things that we do is we have a very strong culture of limiting the work in process. Context switching is a killer. I've read, and I don't have the reference, so I'm not sure 100%, but I've heard that for engineering groups, or engineers specifically, for every additional project you're working on, there is a 20% productivity penalty for the context switch. which means by the time you get to 5, you are now in the negative productivity realm, which isn't where any of us want to be. But if we can focus on limiting the work in process, then we can actually get things done more regularly. And that actually allows us to deliver more value faster.
For me, what I do with my team at a very high level, I have different team depending on back end, front end, and related to the apps. But at the very high level, we want to ensure that what we are working on not only align with the priority, but we also want to give him some capacity in order to work on innovation and some capacity to work on sustaining engineering, so that instead of him having to hide the work that we're doing behind the scene, you basically making the capacity very clear to everyone. Here's the full 100% capacity. 70% is going to be allocated to the strategy that we need to execute against. You have another 20% for sustained engineering, and you have 10% to work on anything you want to do from your apps and everything else. And by having that transparency up front, it allowed the team to be very focused on what they need to work on and what permission they have in order to work on the thing that they would love to work on. Because developer, they like to experiment. They like to work on certain things. So you need to find a balance in the must do, the like you nice to have, and then we have sustained engineering, which is, updating the system, the stuff that we have to do anyway in order to maintain what we already developed and delivered to production.
Yeah, I think there's some key there, which is around the sort of balance. And, I think there's the sort of idea of balance of like, can people spend time on innovation stuff or sustaining engineering type things? But another sort of balance to think about is, are you sort of doing enough work on sort of long-term and short-term things, or are you just working on the here and the now? And I think particularly for leaders, this is something where when you look at your backlog of things to do, if you're only just focusing on the things for this week, you're going to be sort of hit with something probably in the next couple of months with something that you didn't really think about or plan for, and then you suddenly have to deal with it. And so I think one of the sort of things there is also making sure that you're balancing in terms of time horizons of things that as you sort of maybe go up a hierarchy, you're thinking in longer and longer horizons to make sure that things are aligned. And it kind of connects back to what David was saying, which is really about that sort of making sure that there is a sort of North Star. And I think this is probably the hardest thing in a lot of organizations, in that most people have different goals that don't always align. And I think this is one of the difficulties of you as a leader of trying to create a set of priorities of maybe different stakeholders or different activities where it's clear about for a certain time box, these are a sort of ordered ranked list of most important things. I think that's one of the difficult things, is that to do that, you have to be able to also say no, which is also a skill, or no, not yet, because there's only a limited amount of time that you can spend on things.
I love no, not yet. I need to use that more at home.
Yeah. Next iteration, it's fine.
Awesome. So with the uncertainty brought on by recent global events that we all know about, it's changed business projections and goals and all of those things for businesses everywhere. How have you changed your strategies and approaches with your team?
So one thing for us has been more of a reshuffling of priority based on our changing marketplace. We interact a lot with our customers on a regular basis. And so there have been items that have been on the list for not yet, but those items have become very urgent for some of our customers, or a large portion of our customers. And so we've accelerated some of those, which means deferring other things that we had considered higher priority. You really do have a limit to the number of things you can do at any given time. And so if you are taking on something else, that means one of the things that you were doing has to get taken off the list and put to the back or put somewhere. It's just not going to receive active work.
We all know that with COVID-19 and Corona, everything kind of like switched overnight from retail store and physical location to remote. So subsequently, I always tell my team a change, whether it's welcome or unwelcome, is a signal to adapt, is a signal to pivot. So subsequently, with coronavirus and everything else, we know that we have to pivot our strategy to more digital. We know that we need to make accessibility easy for our customers online, easy for them to make the payment online. Everything that we were doing at the store, we need to provide the same capability remotely to most of our agents and most of our customers. So you have to adjust your roadmap. You have to adjust your priority. You can't just keep going. Everybody know what happened to Blockbuster. They didn't want to pivot, and now they're no longer here. Everybody know what happened to Circuit City. They didn't want to pivot, and God knows what happened to them. So any change to me is basically a signal that we need to adapt and change, and then you need to be able to revisit your roadmap and then figure out what are the current needs of the market and adjust in order to meet the need.
One of the things there that I find really enables that is limiting your work in process. Again, going back to that same concept. If you have a 6-month project and you're 4 months into it and suddenly pandemic, do you accept that you're going to lose those sunk costs and just abandon the project and shift to the new priority? Or do you try to keep it limping along? Or do you double down and hope to finish early so that you can tackle the next thing? And so slicing things into small batches and limiting the number that you are actively working on enables you to make the changes necessary when conditions change. And they always do, right? That is one of the inevitable things, is that the market conditions always change, whether it's global pandemic or whether it's just a new competitor who announces a product that is suddenly right in your space. Using history as an example, Kmart was doing everything right when Walmart destroyed them, right? They were focusing on all the right metrics for retail, and they were doing better than their competitors until Walmart came in and was doing 5 times better even than Kmart. Some of those things about cycling the product you have on shelves, they thought they were doing great because they were beating everybody else in the space. But the market conditions always change. So we need to be able to react to that. And one of the biggest strategies we use is by limiting the size of the things that we take on at any given time.
I fully agree. That makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely agree. Well, I want to take a bit of a different angle here, because I think one of the hard things about something like COVID at the moment is it's tremendous amounts of change, not just sort of change that's happening in the industry, but change to everything. And I think one of the sort of key things I think about as a leader is sort of taking care of the team and making sure that they're safe, right? And I think this is the hard thing, is that personal lives are blurring together with work lives. I've read reports about people being more productive, but also the sort of maybe the signs that people can't disengage from work because they can't sort of leave an office. And so that's kind of potentially the consequence for burnout in the future. And I think this is the hard thing of trying to make sure that, you as a leader are taking care of your team, making sure that they're set up, things are accessible, that they have all the things that they can be to be successful. And at the same time, working with your sort of organization to refocus on what is the most important things, which is what leaders should be focusing on anyway. But creating a clear path to shifting that. And the difficulty is that takes some time in an organization to sort of get agreement around. But there's things that you can do to be really taking care of the health of your team, making sure that you're sort of fostering a sort of team culture that maybe was used to an in-person office, but now has to build this remotely. And so you have to sort of reset some of those behaviors and expectations. And I think that's a particularly important thing in these times.
Yeah, it certainly is. One of the things that for me has become much more top of mind is the need to individualize for the circumstances of each member of a team, right? You may have had your standard policy around work from home or whatever, and all of a sudden it may not apply to certain people. And you may find that I think we've all found that we have certain people on our team who they are a 2-income household with children. And that means there's children on your Zoom calls, which you never would have found acceptable in the past, but suddenly that is part of the individual's life. We've often talked about, bring your whole self to work, but nobody really does, right? We all bring a curated representation of ourself to work. And now suddenly work is in our homes in a way that it hasn't been in the past. And now more of ourself becomes present. And that means an opportunity to build trust and connection across teams. But it also, if you don't have the right culture, it can bring fear or, I've talked to people at some of the local leadership meetups here in Salt Lake City about how do you get people to engage on Zoom? Everybody in our team and on our company is leaving their cameras off when they're on Zoom. And so we don't see anybody and we're losing that connection. And I honestly don't know, because everybody on my team is always on camera. They want that, or they're craving that connection. But if they didn't, still there's a need to individualize our response based on what that person's circumstance actually is.
How have your meetings with your teams changed kind of organically?
Well, my team knows, I think everybody that work with me know that I don't go to any meeting with no agenda. That's my big peeve. You need to have an agenda for a meeting. So when we were at the office, we usually have clarity on the agenda. But now I'm working on the team in a way that we want to use the meeting only for decision making or to align a few stakeholders. Or the status meeting, you don't need a meeting to provide a status. You don't need a meeting to provide some information. So we kind of cut down, I'm not going to call it wasteful, but we're trying to be smarter about using everybody's time. And as David mentioned, there's no, you go from downstairs in your pajamas or whatever, you at work. So you cannot be on meeting from 8 a.m. all the way to 6, 7 p.m. So we're trying to adjust and alter the meeting in a way that people are only meeting in order for decision making and if we need to get the stakeholder aligned. And I also work with the team in a way that in the meeting we actually we are coming together so that we can make a decision on X and we want to walk away with Y. So if you need to do any lobbying before the meeting, go and do your lobbying, do whatever you need to do so that you come prepared at the meeting in order to be productive. The second thing we also done is we also bring together most of the retro that we were doing with the team. So if several agile teams work on similar project, we're trying to bring all the team to do the retro together so that we can learn really quickly instead of doing separate silo retro, we do the retro together. So it has been very successful. And the last thing that we've done also, we reduced the meeting from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. And we use the first 10 minutes of the meeting to check on everybody. So everybody gets a chance to, talk about their day. And then we use the 20 minutes to actually talk about whatever you need to talk about. So I've been getting a lot of good feedback. And the team has been very grateful to that little gap of time that we've given to them. And then to really use the time together to really make decisions.
We have needed to supplement some of our meetings with an opportunity to replace that in-person contact that we've had in the past. So we have introduced a couple of additional check-in type meetings through the week. One, every Monday, we get the whole company together in the early afternoon just for 15 minutes, just so that we can see everybody and share a couple of the successes that have happened in the last week as a way to reconnect and realign everybody who has been mostly disconnected most of the week. We've also refocused some of our meetings around some of that building social connection, like you were talking about, building some of the social connection as opposed to just doing some of what we would have typically done in the past, where we were already socially connected, so we would just talk about specific work items. Right now we have some of that we've introduced as well, and that's been very helpful.
What would you all say is the most important thing you've learned from moving to online meetings?
Put some clothes on, maybe. I'm just kidding. I mean, one of the most important things, to be honest with you, is to give people the same way that when we were at the office, when we come in, you chat a little bit. It's not because we are online that you should come right in and start working. So you want to give people some time to come in, ask them about their day. Somebody want to show them a coffee mug or whatever. You need to find a way to kind of relax the team a little bit and then jumping into the work. As I mentioned earlier, that's the reason why we moved. The meeting actually is 20 minutes, and the first 10 minutes is kind of like checking on everybody. So it gives people time to go get some coffee, stand up from the previous meeting. So, and also a couple of team members actually mentioned to me that there was something related to the video. So like David, you just mentioned, some people don't want to be on video all the time. Some people will be like, well, I've been in the video all morning. Now I don't have my hair done. I don't want to be on video. So it's okay to kind of like give people the option to choose, to be on video or not on video, so that they feel like they have that flexibility in between. So those are the key things that I've learned. But most importantly, to be okay with somebody, my dog jumped on me a couple of times, people have kids, and you just need to embrace all of it together and be okay to be interrupted every now and then.
For me, I think that's been a couple of interesting lessons. I think one is the art of knowing how to run meetings well is even more important in an online sort of space, because you're trying to minimize how much time people are sort of spending, because video is tiring for a lot of people. And I think managers particularly get hit by this, in particular doing one-on-ones, and back-to-back one-on-ones can be like really exhausting for a lot of people for an entire day. And then I think the other thing is the sort of experimenting with different sort of interactive formats. So, retrospectives, for instance, and trying out things like mirror boards and trying to use these collaboration tools, which a lot of organizations haven't maybe gotten used to. And I think trying to experiment with some of those tools and trying to do things more asynchronously. And I think that's the art of, do you need a meeting? Is can this be done through another mechanism, either like a design document or a Slack channel where people can post updates asynchronously? These are sort of things that are definitely maybe more prominent about good meeting hygiene.
I think that's definitely true. You've both mentioned techniques that I have found essential. One of them is using an agenda. Like, why are we even meeting? And I haven't been nearly so forceful about it, but I do appreciate that stance, right? Every meeting should have an agenda, and possibly an exit criteria where once this is done, we're done. We don't have to use the full 50 minutes or whatever that was booked in the calendar, because that's the default in Google Speedy Meetings or whatever. And the Miro boards is something my team has been using recently. I think one of the things that we've missed are the physical whiteboards that we could all interact with. There's something about having that tactile, visceral experience. And Miro is really helping bring some of that back in a way that I didn't expect we would be able to get.
Yeah, on the whiteboard thing, I've had some success playing around with Microsoft Surface, actually, or the whiteboard and Surface. It seems to work quite well.
Yeah, so because it's the touchscreen?
Touchscreen, but also syncs with sort of Zoom, so people can collaboratively do it at the same time with a whiteboard.
That's very cool. I really like that. One of the things my team has mentioned is that because we have had remote team members forever, a lot of it hasn't changed a ton. Some of the people have said, oh, well, we went from some people being remote and now everyone is effectively remote. That's leveled the playing field in some ways and made some things better, because now everyone is feeling the pain instead of just a couple of people. And then people share their ideas. Plus, having people with experience working remotely, they've been able to share some of the things that have worked well for them. And that has actually been super helpful. So that I've appreciated that willingness of members of my teams to collaborate around creating a successful environment for the group.
And I do have a question here from the audience, and we've answered some of this, but it came in earlier. And it says, when we were in the office pre-COVID, my team had a really strong bond. The team had an identity and a culture that I was proud of. As we transitioned to fully remote work, I had to rely on that bond to keep everybody engaged and productive. I feel like team culture is eroding the longer we're remote, in spite of virtual team building, full team meetings, optional lunch breaks, etc. Our in-person interaction was such a critical component of the magic of this team. Do you have any suggestions on how to rebuild that with continuing remote work?
But it's very important that everybody have to remember, you cannot replace 100% the human connection that we have. We are social beings. We are made to be connected and to touch each other and be together. So the best we can do is in a virtual environment, how we can work together to try to bring that, by talking all the time and trying to figure out something to sync up, virtual coffee, virtual water coolers. I don't know if I have all those things on my calendar every now and then. Between virtual coffee, I'm awake but from 7:30 in the morning, so people can have 15 minutes of virtual coffee. And then, usually on Thursdays and Tuesdays, I have virtual water coolers where for 1 hour, we have this open room that everybody can go and kind of talk. But it would be unkind to ourselves to basically say we can 100% replace the connectivity and connection that we had at the office. So I think that would not be attainable. But we can do our very best with I just mentioned the water cooler and all that stuff to continue to stay connected. And everybody keep forgetting about this. We still have phones. So you can still call people on your cell phone and talk to them. You don't have to talk to people only to WebEx and Zoom. And you will be surprised, the amount of connectivity that you can have by somebody hearing your voice, even if they don't see you, hearing your voice and be able to talk to them. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I wanted to kind of add some kind of perspective and reality check that, the connection that we have is not 100% replaceable virtually.
I think that's completely true. And I think it's one of the things where even remote and fully remote, companies or teams, they still try to come together, once a year because you can't replace that, face-to-face sort of contact. But some of the things that you've already talked about kind of touched upon this, which is like the virtual water cooler and sort of coffee breaks. I think the things that really build a sort of team are those things where they spend time together, sharing sort of common experiences. And so I think if you focus on what can you do in that sort of way, how can people learn about each other a bit more that isn't necessarily related to a task that they happen to be working on, but learn about the person behind, the team member. And so, some teams that I'm sort of working with, they might be doing like a challenge where each of the team members take part in a common challenge and they sort of share updates and they can sort of do that. It might be a baking challenge, it might be a sports challenge. Had one team which was like doing, daily push-ups, and then they're posting how many push-ups they've been able to do throughout the day. But, I think sharing common experiences and facilitating that and creating sort of space, I don't think you can force some of those things, but you can at least see which things stick. And then just trying to focus on those sort of common experiences, understanding that everyone's going to be in a very different part. So you also can't expect everyone to take part. People have different constraints, children or things they have to sort of take care of at home. But trying to foster that and create those opportunities where people can have more of that personal contact, I think is key in sort of a distributed team.
One of the things that has been part of our engineering culture has been playing board games at lunch. And so that has moved online, and now our engineering team is hosting a once a week casual gaming session online for anybody in the company who wants to participate. I think it's actually starting in about 10 minutes. So it's just one of the things that has been part of our culture. So I think that what you need to do is look at what has disappeared from your culture as you've transitioned to online. What were the key things that people were doing but are not doing now, and find a way to replace that. One of the things that we've done is for some of the teams, we've created just an open meeting room online on Zoom. And if anybody can just drop in and just kind of hang out there, you keep working on whatever you're working on or whatever. It's not necessarily the same as our groups that do mob programming and pair programming where they're together all the time, but it's like, it's just open and you can jump in and connect with other people if you're just feeling that need to like get out of your closed office space at home. So there's a lot of techniques, and some of them require that we invest a little bit more money than we would have previously. Like I don't buy board games for my team, but I might be willing to buy them a couple of digital board games if that helps keep the connection of the team going.
Thank you very much to all of you for participating in this. I think this has been great.
Thank you so much. I just want to leave everybody's listening right now. Whenever you are in doubt, whether you're a leader at home or wherever you are, choose kindness, choose love. Because if you lead with kindness, love, and compassion, you can meet people where they are, and then you can bring them on board with you toward your, trying to find them to pull them with you. So whenever in doubt, choose love and kindness.
Great closing words. Thank you very much for the discussion.
Thank you for listening to All Hands on Tech. To see show notes and more info, go to pluralsight.com/podcast. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.